You're listening to Where We Are, a weekend conversation on faith, politics, family, and culture, hosted by me, Michael Ware, and my wife, Melissa. We bring our wide-ranging experiences in politics, ministry, and nonprofit life to bear as we discuss the issues of the day. On this week's episode, we're going to talk about the seriousness of our politics and the unseriousness of so many of our politicians. You're listening to Where We Are.
Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
It's that time of year when the world falls in love. Every song you hear seems to say, Melissa.
What are you singing?
It's the Carpenters.
Oh, no.
I am not a Carpenters guy, except
Yes, but you
when it
grew
comes
up
to
with it.
Christmas time.
I did not grow up with it.
It's Carpenters time. It's Christmas time.
It's hammer time.
Christmas markets open this weekend.
It does. They do.
Yes.
Yes, in Baltimore.
In Baltimore and
in
DC.
DC. We've never done the DC ones. The DC ones, meh. They don't look too traditional to me, but meh.
You should run in the Iowa caucus, I think, with that take. No, but Baltimore has an amazing Christmas market.
It does. It's very cute.
One of the best I've seen in this country, and we've been around the Rust Belt.
I am something of a Christmas market connoisseur, so I know. Yeah,
no, it's very good. You should run through Baltimore. It runs between now and I think like early January. It runs for a long time. We are very happy to be with you. I have recovered from sleep, though it's kind of like the book comes out in 2.5 months, Melissa. Mm-hmm. I record the audiobook for The Spirit of Our Politics on Monday and Tuesday of this week. Not too bad for someone who spent much of his youth in speech therapy, I might add. A big win for the language development program in the town of Tonawanda, New York. Shout out to them. This belongs to you, LDP. And, have I ever told you I went to the LDP? My language development was right next to our high school.
Oh, wow, Michael. No, I've never heard that out of your mouth.
That building doesn't exist anymore. It's now senior homes.
I know, and your grandma lived there.
Where my grandma lived.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy?
Full circle, Michael.
Full circle.
Okay. I am glad that you got speech therapy and it worked, though, because you're a great speaker now.
Well, thanks. Zonovan thinks so.
Yeah.
I had to send them a little audio file so that they could make sure
your audition for your own words.
Yeah, I had to audition to read my own book, and I sent them an audio file, and they were like, "This'll do." So
that'll do, pig.
What I'm wondering is if I'm going to have other people asking me to read their books after they see just how I knock this out of the park.
I'm sure they will, Michael.
You
can read my book.
What's going on in your... What's your book on?
Cat diplomacy.
You had that answer coming out of a holster.
Yes.
What's
Anyways, let's get into it.
What's going on in your life?
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm always like jump straight into it, skip over my life. I mean, our girls are just fighting a lot lately, so I'm very tapped out when it comes to motherhood right now. But the great thing is that our firstborn has her birthday this week. She has our very first kid birthday party tomorrow. Well, what will be today when this episode airs. And it's a Baby Yoda birthday party. I created the invitations, and she is so stoked for it. And I'm very excited for her.
I'm going to make her do her Baby Yoda impression at least 3 dozen times.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
She has a bunch of her classmates coming and some of her other little friends coming, some cousins and things like that. So it's going to be cute to see her surrounded by, have a ton of 4 and 5-year-olds in our house. A few 2-year-olds too.
Yeah, we thought we were just past the time period where we had to worry about our house being a safety hazard for children, but tomorrow will be another
Testing those
test
waters.
of that.
Yeah,
fantastic. Maybe that will lead us to fix our deck, but not in time for tomorrow. Good luck, kids.
Yeah,
very exciting that our eldest is turning 5. That feels like a milestone.
It's a huge milestone. I can't believe it.
I've been trying to process it, and my heart won't let me.
I know you're a big feelings man.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of big feelings,
yeah, a lot of people in Congress had them this week.
we are getting very good at the transitions.
We really are.
This is really
it's
stellar.
only taken me about a year and a half.
Yeah, I think this is episode 87, 88.
It's 88, the year we were born.
Don't age me in front of our listeners.
Do we think we have like a bunch of 17-year-olds listening to us?
Well, no. I think we have a bunch of judgy 30-something.
This one goes out to you.
Yeah, so I think there is so much happening in the news, and
lots of serious things.
We talked a bit about what we wanted to focus on this episode, and I think this episode will be something of like a news smorgasbord, but the through line of it is going to be, it has been a really, really serious couple of months news-wise. And both the conduct and what gets so much of the attention not only doesn't reflect that, but it seems like the more serious our news gets, the more infantile some of our public officials and just the political culture generally is becoming. On the serious side, for the first time in over a year, President Biden met with Xi Jinping in California.
Yeah, Silicon Valley on the side of the APEC meeting, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation meeting. They met for 4 hours, the longest. It's the first meeting that Biden's had with him since becoming president. 4 hours is a very long meeting for two leaders. Xi Jinping came in with much softer language. They immediately came to a deal on the chemicals that China produces around fentanyl. They agreed to military communications that will help with a lot of miscommunications, especially as China has been ramping up its sort of belligerence in the South China Sea. they discussed things like Taiwan, and apparently she, didn't completely soften his stance there, but said that they have no immediate aims with what they call their territory. And so there were actually some victories. The fact that China, because China economically is not doing well at all, it's had a complete consumer confidence crisis. They have
For the
had
first time in what, like decades, the U.S. economy outperformed the Chinese economy.
Yes, they've had bankruptcies. They're having a housing crisis or property crisis, really. And so she is in a very vulnerable place. And so diplomacy has been opened back up. And I mean, the Biden administration's been working on this for months. He had the Secretary of State this past summer, and then the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, went in for a meeting.
Because things really broke down around Pelosi going to Taiwan,
Yes.
the spy balloon.
Balloons.
As much as, and I will say, kind of hard not to make jokes about the spy balloon.
I'll never not make jokes about the spy
balloon. But that
balloons.
is an example of something that actually had very serious implications.
And it was just memeified.
Yeah.
Yes. And so we're at a really critical and interesting point in U.S.-China relations with China. They used to call their diplomacy and their diplomats wolf warriors. And that sort of moniker is kind of dying down because China is in a very vulnerable economic standpoint. I mean, Biden, with the measures that he took on semiconductors and chips being produced in the United States, has really hurt China economically. And so she came in saying, hey, can you guys calm yourselves on that one? We're losing out economically. Whereas Biden, his whole point is like, this is a national security issue because the Chinese military uses these things. But still, the fact that they kind of came in with a much sort of more vulnerable posture is huge for the United States, because China's been a huge thorn in its side. With Israel and Gaza going on, China is a very important factor besides Russia. Obviously, Ukraine is still going on. And is a long, protracted war at this point. I mean, just on the foreign policy and national security front, it's multiple fronts going on. We have famines, genocides elsewhere in the world, just a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, just to put not a bow on but just to give listeners something to keep an eye on when it comes to U.S.-China relations. Taiwan holds elections in January, and so American officials have been pretty clear that they're going to be watching very closely for interference from China. And I think things can get more frosty really quickly if that happens, if China limits its interference and attempts to influence the election in Taiwan. Then you could see some real momentum and thawing potentially in the U.S.-China relationship. It is interesting. We're not in the late 90s anymore. I was struck by just the open admission of competitiveness and a certain level of adversarialism, sort of a we need to hold things together and not let things get out of hand. But implicit in that is an admission that they're competing and that there are attempts to undermine. The nations are attempting to undermine one another. And so I was really struck by that. I read a quote from Xi's opening remarks before they went into the summit on the Morning Five this past week that I thought was striking for its sort of sense of history and that sort of thing. So that's U.S.-China. As Melissa sort of alluded to, whether you look at Armenia and what's happening in Armenia, obviously Ukraine, I think what's at the forefront of many of our minds, Israel, Gaza, I mean, this has been a...
Get out of the trenches of tedious tasks like managing order fulfillment and start growing your business with ShipStation. They'll help increase profitability by automating your workflow with their simple, easy-to-use dashboard. With it, you can pretty much do everything you need to quickly and easily. Update order information, print labels, compare rates, optimize shipments, and even set up automatic delivery notifications. And it doesn't matter where you sell. Amazon, Etsy, eBay, Shopify, ShipStation can integrate pretty much anywhere online. Another great thing about ShipStation? They can help reduce costs with industry-leading discounted rates from some of the biggest mail carriers. You might even be able to get up to 89% off USPS and UPS rates. So, make this year your most profitable one yet. Sign up for your free 30-day trial at ShipStation.com and use the code Spotify. That's ShipStation.com with the code Spotify.
A world-shaping couple of months in terms of foreign policy. You look at the U.S. Major, significant administrative action from the Biden administration on AI.
Yep.
While Congress has been doing investigation and hearings around AI, which I think the Obama Foundation held a summit that was in large part on AI. President Obama, former President Obama, giving a major speech on AI. The capacity of these technological developments to transform American life over the course of the next 10 years is becoming clearer and clearer. And that is something that a whole range of congressional committees, a whole range of policymakers, like, it's going to be an all hands on deck policy sort of situation to figure out how we're going to respond to these developments. You look at the fact that we didn't have a Speaker of the House for 3 weeks. Now we do, and a continuing resolution was passed days before the deadline that doesn't solve the issue, but again avoids government shutdown, gives Congress more time, hopefully, for something that's long-lasting. I think a fairly serious, the most serious would be to pass a budget, but
yes,
but and to fund what you've committed to fund, but a pretty relatively serious process unfolded, and there wasn't a lot of drama in terms of how that was executed. It was a bipartisan vote. All that to say, a lot happening on the domestic front as well. And so these last 2 months have been so significant for how, well, and I'll just add, right, when we talk about the budget, we're talking about nutrition aid. We're talking about, there was a debate this week around the child tax credit and the support families receive. So we're talking about policy changes that will affect hundreds of millions of people. And yet, if I asked folks, what do you know about what happened between U.S. and China this week, the vast majority would say no idea. And I would venture, well, Melissa, what do you think most people saw out of the U.S.-China summit?
Oh, they definitely saw that President Biden in a press conference right after that four-hour meeting. It was just Biden. It wasn't Xi Jinping with him. He was asked a question where he was basically asked, "Do you still think Xi is a dictator?" He says, "Yes, I think he's a dictator," because previously this past summer Biden called him a dictator.
Now, what specifically? So I think that's right. What specifically?
So they had the cameras on Secretary of State Antony Blinken sort of shuddering a little bit when Biden said that. And frankly, I was like, okay, let me go watch the video. I watched the video, and I didn't read into his body language as much as other people are reading into it, but people were saying is as if the man like convulsed and like stood up and shouted, "Absolutely not,
But
Mr. President."
Right, like to me, this is like a perfect. The president of one of the world's great superpowers
Yes.
referred to the leader of the world's other superpower as a dictator, and the cameras and the attention and the commentary is about whether Secretary of State, basically having body language readers on the
Yes.
Secretary of State. And what I saw was most of it was devoid of any actual substantive. Well, why might the Secretary of State not have
Yes.
wanted that?
Nobody's
and to me,
answering that question.
Well, and I don't think that should be where the focus is. But
yes.
But B, if you wanted to focus there, you could at least use it as an opening to have a somewhat edifying conversation about.
This is why it's not good for the United States to call him a dictator after
Or
a
at
meeting
least,
like that.
or at least that
why would
some
he?
people think that Biden shouldn't have done that because because we just reestablished military
Yeah.
communications with the country. But this is like what our media and our political culture does, which is it points somewhere, and then even if you think it's a silly thing to point at, you're arguing about why it's silly to point there, as opposed to the fact that you had a truly historic meeting that had several substantive agreements
Yes.
come out of it, and I can't tell you the number of times I've seen that stupid video
Yeah.
of Blinken like moving his eyelids and
Like existing in the
and
world.
folks. So that's one example. I think another example is this has just not been a banner week for Congress. We saw over the last, I think, we've seen members of Congress shouting at each other, calling each other Smurfs, and bringing people's family members into a committee debate. We saw a United States Senator from Oklahoma challenge someone giving congressional testimony to a fight where Bernie Sanders, of all people, had to step in and remind the senator from Oklahoma that he is in fact a United States senator and probably shouldn't be challenging people to fights in the middle of a Senate hearing. We had Tim Burchett of Tennessee, congressman, accusing former Speaker McCarthy of elbowing him in a hallway, which is the most, I don't know if it happened, don't know if it didn't happen, whatever. It sounds like an episode of Saved by the Bell. Like it sounds like what happens in a middle school hallway, not
Yes.
the halls of Congress. And so it's just disorienting to the average American to see headlines saying that there are huge threats, huge developments, AI, China, Israel, Gaza, Russia, Ukraine, that could transform their way of life. And then they look to DC, and whether it's because it's the dominant behavior, which I don't think it is, I think there are a lot of wonderful people working on the Hill. There are a lot of wonderful people in Congress. But what gets the attention, what gets the headlines, is this sort of adolescent behavior. And I think the question I have, and that I've had, that I always ask myself is, to what extent is behavior like this a result of the immaturity of the people in these leadership positions, whether it's elected office, journalism, etc., or those leaders' determination of what the American people themselves want or demand or are seeking from them? I increasingly think it's a vicious cycle of both. The worse our leaders' behavior gets, the more it caters to the worst impulses of basically consumers, then the lower the bar goes next time. But yeah, Melissa, what thoughts do you have?
Do you know what would be so interesting, especially after the challenge to the fight, that whole scene, I don't even know what to call it, in the Senate this week, with Senator Bernie Sanders coming in and becoming a mediator, is I would love if somebody just went and investigated with those two congressional offices and said, hey, how many letters, calls, emails, carrier pigeons have you received after that, as saying that they didn't like what went down, or they didn't like the behavior? Do they, are there any slaps on the wrist from their constituents, let alone like the American people writ large? I would love to know constituency how they respond in situations like this. Like, that kind of investigation would be interesting to me, because Michael, I know in your book, in quite a few areas, and in general, you've been thinking about this a lot, about the American public and what it wants out of its politics, and how politicians respond to that. And then you call it a vicious cycle, and then what sort of feeds into that, and vice versa. That's my first reaction, is how much are these politicians who are just acting so immaturely in such serious times, and when people around the world are in various crises, and in Washington, folks are challenging each other to fights, what people actually really think. This is a time for polling. This is a time for an investigation. I want to know.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that there are members of Congress who are doing work, and their staff members are, there are many who take their jobs seriously. I think the vast majority. But there are increasingly fewer of these serious members of Congress. Punchbowl News put together, did some outreach to retiring House members on their motivations to retire from office. Here are some of the quotes and reactions. It's from Congressman Earl Blumenauer of Oregon. It's insane, and it adds no value to my life, referring to being a member of Congress. The things I care about, I can do better not here. Congressman Ken Buck said, it's stupid, impeach that person, censure that person. It's all political, so members can go raise money and talk tough back home. I mean, it's so important. Like, Ken Buck, he's no squish. He's no sort of he's not exactly, he's not like Charlie Dent. And I like Charlie Dent, former congressman from Pennsylvania, but he's not someone who's constantly appealing to bipartisanship and civility and these kinds of things. Ken Buck is a Freedom Caucus member, and yet on his way out, he's saying this is all just so stupid. And we hear that from, this is what Speaker McCarthy was saying. This is what we've heard from Boehner and Paul Ryan and so many former members of Congress. And so, yeah, it's
And there's
deeply unfortunate.
And there's a certain point where, you sit and you think about this with these various members now more often than ever. I mean, who was it? The first representative, Blumenauer,
Yeah.
sorry, who has been there since 1996. So he's seen a lot.
Yeah.
And so it's just not a good sign that somebody from 1996 is saying it's actually really bad right now. And things are this bad for me to leave and I can do better elsewhere. Is that each of these representatives or senators, whomever it is that's retiring and are saying these things, their constituency is listening. Again, it goes down to like the local level. Because when those kinds of announcements are made, they make the local news, and local news is like TV. Local news is still extremely popular, even amongst Gen Z and millennials. The numbers are still very high. And so folks in various areas around the country are hearing these messages from their elected leaders. And the message that they're hearing is that this type of public service is useless. It's stupid. It doesn't matter. Nothing gets done. It's just fighting. And in some cases, that work can be done elsewhere when obviously work can be done elsewhere. There's plenty of good that can be done at local, state level government, nonprofits, service sector, public-private partnerships. But obviously the federal government is a huge deal into how our society operates. And so it doesn't look good, Michael.
No. And, it sounds like a broken record here, but until we stop rewarding it, and until we stop saying things like, well, yeah, I wish this politician was, more mature, but, at least they're on the right side, or these kinds of things that downplay the cultural output of these people. Because they might vote the right way. No, we need to actually start counting contribution to our political culture as part of how we judge and how we evaluate the both elected officials, but again, also folks in other positions of responsibility, journalism, civic leadership of all kinds. So we try to play our part here of pointing your attention to the real human consequences of political decision making without making more of politics than it should be, and certainly not playing into the sort of politics as entertainment that we so often see. Unless Melissa has a joke to make, and then we'll break the rules for that.
I really don't have many jokes.
Hey, Melissa, anything you wanna add?
No, if you yourself as a listener, I know that often with these sorts of things, these like bigger topics or more existential topics, that sometimes it's hard to be like, hold up a second, is there anything that I can do? And, with your local Congress people, especially if they are doing something that you really support, or if not just about like the policy or like the every single line of like a piece of policy, but the politics, like the way they conduct themselves, the posture, the things like that. If they're doing anything that you don't like, or you think is actually raising the temperature, or you think is turning politics into entertainment, is, corroding something, then contact them. Tell them that. It is good that they hear from you and hear from your voice, not just on the, who's winning or losing, or like, it's good for them to hear that you don't like that they're challenging somebody to a fight, et cetera, et cetera. So if for those of you out there who I know who think in that way of what can I do about something like this, or, this concerns me as well, and how can I help? That's one way you can help.
Yeah. All right, folks, that's all we have for this week's episode of Where We Are. Hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I want to hear what you're cooking. Send us photos, Send us recipes.
I like dessert photos in particular. Let me know your desserts.
And just very direct to Melissa.
So I always am.
And kind of demanding.
Always. That's me. Hello.
And we'll be back after Thanksgiving for another episode of Where We Are. Thanks for listening.
Bye.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up.